2016 election was a very or somewhat significant source of stress. And as far back as July, 59% of Americans said that they were simply worn out by the amount of election coverage. So our stress didn't just start Tuesday. It's been going for many of us for months and months and even years. 4 months, and for many of us, a shocking voting outcome later. We are, some of us, many of us, suffering from all stages of battle fatigue and grief, numbness and uncontrollable tears, immense anger, immense sadness, too much sleeping, too little sleeping, stomach aches and worse, and some others of us, incredible fear as well. Indeed, those some others of us who were named during the campaign or feel ourselves hatefully targeted over the course of the campaign in debates, on signs, in shouts and jeers, on Facebook, in tweets aimed at Mexicans and Muslims and disabled people and gays and lesbians and transgendered people and sexually assaulted and violated women and Jews. As a Jewish Unitarian Universalist, I can testify today to my own triggered fear, watching and listening as, in the words of columnist Nathan Gutman, anti-Semitism came out of the sewer. From Auschwitz-themed tweets to Protocol of Elders-inspired speeches and campaign ads warning of international financial conspiracies, which is code for Jewish control of the world economy and blame for all of its woes. Blatant anti-Jewish bigotry, he wrote, which has been dormant for decades, has had its comeback under the auspices of a presidential campaign. It did not help that Wednesday, the day after this frightening election season came to its tumultuous end, was the 78th anniversary of Kristallnacht. The November night in 1938 when German fascists torched and vandalized and destroyed Jewish-owned businesses, and that was the first time some Jews got taken away to concentration camps, that early in 1938. They painted crude Stars of David and racial slurs. They shattered windows into millions of pieces, hence Kristallnacht, that caused fear and panic as Hitler rose to power. The day after Donald Trump won the American presidency, shop windows in Philadelphia were black spray painted with swastikas and signs that said Sieg Heil 2016. His misogyny is well documented. We can all agree, well documented. But whether the president-elect is actually personally anti-Semitic, racist, homophobic, trans-hating, anti-Muslim, and anti-immigrant is not what matters. It's not what matters, not anymore, because on the way to victory, he unbottled a poisonous strain of unadulterated, other-hating racism, homophobia, Islamophobia, misogyny, and extreme nationalism. Whether he believed or believed it at all. While there is more analysis to be done on exactly what happened in this election year, who voted, who didn't vote, and why, while there is work to be done to respond politically, to put many fingers in many dikes to protect this fragile experiment in democracy, as for me, for now, I am shoring up my personal religious values that no one can take away, that can comfort and sustain me, while we all figure out where we go next. What Unitarian Universalist minister Naomi King calls, and she's the daughter of Stephen King, by the way, Naomi King. She has she has a blog-based, Twitter-based ministry because she's disabled, very disabled. In fact, she disappeared for a year a while ago, and her loss was incredible to the ministerial community. Naomi King is just a giant for us in thoughtfulness. And she calls her values the faithful promises she makes herself. faithful promises, which for her includes dignity and respect for all, generosity, kindness, racial justice and equality, and welcoming the stranger as a practice of her faith, which may very well start with the simple act of talking to one. How many of you know the story of Little Red Riding Hood? It's okay. Believe me, I've gone places where people don't. I do. I was told this Grimm's fairy tale a lot when I was a child, about how a young girl gets into really big trouble when she befriends the big bad wolf. There's a book called Pretty Salma by artist and teacher Nikki Daly, which she calls a Little Red Riding Hood story from South Africa, to be precise. In this retelling, when Pretty Salma's granny asks her to go to the market one day to buy a giant watermelon and a speckled rooster, she is told to go straight there and come straight home, and warned not to talk to strangers. But just as she is about to leave the market with a full basket on her head, cunning Mr. Dog tricks Salma into speaking with him, and after that her beloved granny is in real danger, only finally to be rescued from a sure death by a ferocious boogeyman and his gang. Don't talk to strangers, it would seem, is actually a global warning to children. One that I must have pretty frequently ignored when I was a child myself of 8 or 9, when my mother was casually writing a journal she kept of a cross-country trip we took from Maryland to California, a kind of 1950s pre-memoir wherein she hand-recorded and described on a clunky manual typewriter a tale of moving her family, including 4 smallish children, from one coast to the other. A harrowing journey fraught with irritations and danger, whining kids tired of repetitive scenery, oversized mosquitoes, a jackknife U-Haul on a switchback mountain pass, flash floods, bitter cold, and bears in bathrooms. Speaking of which, that was my particular assignment whenever we would arrive at a new campground, to check out the facilities, especially for my mother. Where were they in relation to the spot we had chosen, or about which we had no choice? And this was really important to my mother. What was the level of cleanliness? It was this duty I was most likely performing when my mother recorded in an exasperated tone, not worried about her little girl having gone off on her own into the wilds of a state park, that Martha, and that's what she always called me, Martha, had found some strangers to tell our family secrets to. Like always. I don't know about these secrets, don't remember what I said or didn't say at 8 or 9, but I do remember the feeling of at least temporarily escaping the confines of that crowded, littered backseat of a car, which I had shared for hours with 3 rowdy, quarrelsome brothers and a stack of comic books, with my parents smoking in the front seat in their own world, driving or navigating, arguing about the next rest stop. There's a theme here. And the folly of having taken this blasted vacation at all, which made me feel anxious and oddly lonely. I remember the eager feeling of having found companionship, however momentary. That these small conversations with, yes, strangers outside a tent or a trailer somewhere in Ike homeland of America was good for, I would say it, good for my young soul. A girl talking with people she did not know, had never met before, and would most likely never meet again, who maybe listened, who maybe had something interesting to say. The chances of anything bad happening in a very public campground in broad daylight were slim, but at least possible, and yes, even then, in those good old days, we forget, contained their own share of child kidnappings and other horrors. But somehow, amidst the warnings I got, like other millions of kids, about not speaking with strangers, about coming straight home from the children's library, the playground, or the donut store, I also got the experience of connecting with unfamiliar people along my way. That, as a Chinese proverb reminds us, in danger, or was it crisis, there is also, at least sometimes, a positive opportunity. Now, not to say, those grandmas and grandpas and aunts and uncles and caretakers and parents in the room, that these admonitions should be dropped. I'm not saying that at all. But as adults, we may need to re-look at this message, keeping what still is true about it, but opening ourselves up to the possibility that there is something to lose in keeping silent in our casual public lives so much of the time. There are a lot of emerging psychological and sociological data and a lot of articles and blog posts out there these days encouraging those of us adults of all ages to re-examine this warning about avoiding what we might have thought of as useless and unnecessary, perhaps even still dangerous encounters with strangers. This tendency to choose to minimize contacts with people we do not know or do not think we know has been called a social efficiency bias, an expedited strategy for getting done what we need to get done on a daily basis. Researchers at the University of British Columbia, having studied this, report that the choice to choose efficiency, or what we see as increased productivity, to get that something more or bigger done, bypasses the reported increased happiness that comes from reaching out to strike even a short conversation with those store clerks at the Walmart and those security guards and those servers and their hairstylists and the librarians and the bank tellers and the bartenders and so many more. In addition to the happiness correlation, there might be at least some correlation between health heart and talking to strangers. A fairly recent study undertaken at the University of Michigan would indicate that neighborly acts and interactions like watching a house or borrowing eggs or chit-chatting across the fence or on the sidewalk can increase what is described by them as cardiac prosperity. That some kind of bond, even just something of the wave and small variety, has its benefits. And besides being a possible prescription for better health, even longevity, there are other benefits. And this is really interesting. What they have found is we tend to begin these conversations on more of an upbeat note than we might with our more familiar conversation partners. Like especially this week. Like my husband and I are not talking this week, by the way, about the, we're just not, because I want to move and he says that wasn't part of the deal. But perhaps these what? Our parents, our siblings, our spouses, and even our best friends, which forced or not, does tend to rub off on our own ongoing mood once we're done. So if you talk to people that you don't know as well, they're likely to be more cheerful, is what they've proved. I don't know if that's your experience, but the closer in our intimate circle we are, the more likely we're going to get into a funky conversation at times like this. The wider out we go in our circles, the more likely we are to have a cheerful one. We get practice in communication skills and confidence just in the increased amount of practice in putting ourselves out and having a go. We gain perspective, we gain street smarts, we meet more people not like us, which hopefully shifts our worldview. And I want to say that again. We will be more likely to meet people not like us, which will hopefully shift our worldview. For any of you who might or might not have been thinking that this encouragement of deliberately seeking out opportunities for chit-chat might have a female gender bias, and how many of you men were thinking that? With visions of gossip over clothesline popping up, there's an Art of Manliness blog, by the way, which featured a post about an experience in which he, the male blogger, intentionally spoke to a stranger 21 straight days without fail. As he pointed out, not all of his efforts to speak with strangers even got started. In fact, they're often difficult to initiate, even for extroverts. And he learned to keep his expectations realistically low. No, in those 21 days, he did not make any long-term connections. No permanent friendships emerged. The connections were fleeting, mostly superficial, mostly cheerful, and were not going to solve any personal or political problems. They made him happier, they made him more socially agile, and they gave him a window on the world he would not have had otherwise, just as he thought going in. And of course, the possibility of a successful encounter is influenced by broader cultural norms. A friend of mine who grew up in Texas and lives in the Atlanta area for around a decade told me about a time when she and her daughter, who was beginning a freshman year at a college in Scotland, were already feeling out of sync because they were walking around with brightly colored umbrellas and everybody else had dark ones. They were already feeling out of place when they were in line for groceries and she started to speak to two other college girls ahead of them. They not only did not respond, she remembers, but they turned their back on her because that just was not done. Ouch. And in her own lifelong social experience, my friend noticed that certain kinds of people, broadly and crudely characterized, overweight ones, gray-haired ones, ones with different ethnicities, are often either not sought out for small talk or ignored when they initiate it. Ouch. Small talk does not usually translate, by the way, into what we think of as pastoral care, a fact that I really relearned a year ago when my husband and I went on a bus in Ireland with about 30 other strangers, travelers. We had left the States early that week in the midst of a really serious family health crisis, and I felt so far away and so helpless. At some point midway through our day together, having engaged in a lot of chatter with the woman sitting next to me about where we came from. You know, she came from the Midwest, Kansas City, and a little about who we were. She was running a financial consulting business with her husband, and she did tell me, a couple of highly educated adult children. And I told her in some detail about my daughter, who, as many of you might know, gave extremely premature birth to a baby and then had to undergo major surgery and almost died. How worried I was and how I didn't really know what to do. So I'm talking to this stranger. Clearly, this was TMI for her. Her response was literally, in that instant, no response at all. She went back to looking out the window at the wondrously green countryside and asking the driver every few minutes to turn the air conditioning down. But what I also learned in that moment was that that was okay. I did not pursue that line of conversation. No harm had been done to her, as far as I could tell, and the telling of what was going on from me and my family, I did feel less alone with it, without her responding at all. I felt safe enough to speak my emotional truth to a perfectly imperfect stranger with whom I was likely to share very little, except that we were from the same country and that we were about the same age, and we were on the same sightseeing excursion in the wild west of West Ireland. Quaker spiritual counselor and educator Parker Palmer always reminds us that we are essentially communal creatures and relational beings. Personal sharing, he would probably say, is most often done for the sharer. Sharing is done for the sharer. It charges our souls without need for an active response at all. But because while we may need a listener for our speaking, what we say must and does trigger our own work. In a recent piece by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who himself has experienced great political upheaval and has been the target of so much otherness in his life, recognizing the pain and the indignation and social isolation sweeping this country, and he reminds us the whole of the developed world, he suggested that the first answer to this is not systemic, and that's where we tend to go. How can we fix the governments? How can we fix things? It is personal, because everyone has something valuable to share. What if we started each day, he asks, by consciously asking ourselves, what can I do to appreciate the gifts that others offer me?